The suburban haven of Rosewood Greens was, to an outsider, the pinnacle of American neighborhood perfection. Perfectly manicured lawns aligned tidy streets under the shade of old oak trees. Each two-story home boasted neat flower beds and uniform mailboxes. Neighbors waved politely as they walked dogs or jogged before work. Children biked around the cul-de-sacs, under watchful eyes peeking from behind lace curtains. At Rosewood Greens, high property values were sustained by an involved, and some would say intrusive, homeowners association. The Rosewood Greens HOA was infamous for its strict policies and monthly inspections, ensuring that the paint on every house matched approved swatches and that no trash cans lingered a moment too long at the curb after collection. Longtime residents had learned to accept, or at least tolerate, the HOA's micromanagement. A small price to pay, many shrugged, for living in a pristine, safe neighborhood. Beneath this polite veneer, however, tension simmered. Some neighbors chafed at the endless rule enforcement. Others whispered about the tyranny of certain board members. Yet day-to-day life remained mostly pleasant, and drama rarely progressed beyond minor disputes about lawn heights, until Beatrice Arnett decided to take her self-appointed role as enforcer of law and order to an outrageous new level. Beatrice Arnett was a woman in her mid-50s, with coif brown hair that never seemed out of place and a collection of pressed blazers that she wore even on hot summer days. Around the neighborhood, folks simply nicknamed her Karen. Although that name came from exasperated whispers, it spread with unstoppable speed. If Beatrice overheard it, she would simply raise an eyebrow and snap, "I'm only doing what's best for Rosewood Greens." In truth, Karen had begun her HOA journey like any volunteer, wanting to keep the neighborhood nice. Over time, however, her taste for authority ballooned. She took great pride in drafting new bylaws or rewriting existing ones to be more stringent. She spearheaded everything from nighttime noise ordinances to permissible flower types for front lawns. She also liked to brag about her family connections to local officials, though in reality those ties were minimal at best. When the HOA president stepped down due to health reasons, the remaining board members voted Karen in as an interim vice president. That appointment gave her an even more prominent platform, which she interpreted as a license to investigate any neighbor's personal affairs if she suspected impropriety. Her prying eyes didn't limit themselves to whether someone's fence was an inch too tall or if a car was parked the wrong way. She had an amateur's fascination with finances and taxes. Perhaps, in her mind, property upkeep and local bylaws extended to one's personal financial compliance. She would make cryptic comments at block parties, hinting that certain families must be hiding income if they could afford lavish vacations or new cars. Most neighbors dismissed these remarks as idle gossip, but soon, they discover that Karen was willing to transform her baseless suspicions into real torment. My name is Alex Warren. I moved to Rosewood Greens under the guise of an average white-collar worker. The house on Juniper Circle was perfect: 3 bedrooms, a yard for my golden retriever named Max, and a quiet environment that allowed me to work from home in peace. In reality, I was an IRS Special Agent assigned to an undercover post after a separate financial crimes investigation in the area. It wasn't typical for the IRS to plant agents in suburban neighborhoods, but a major case demanded I keep a low profile. Rosewood Greens offered an unassuming base of operations. I told people I was an accountant, which wasn't far from the truth. I had an accounting background. Because of my cover story, neighbors rarely asked further questions, especially once I mentioned that I worked long hours reading spreadsheets. I joined a local gym, occasionally attended HOA meetings to stay in the loop, and tried to appear no different from anyone else. My first impressions of Rosewood Greens were positive: well-kept streets, friendly dog walkers, prompt trash collection. But I soon noticed the tension whenever Karen, Beatrice Arnett, strolled by with her clipboard. People physically stiffened, as if bracing for a scolding. I overheard uneasy jokes about how Karen once threatened to fine someone for leaving their car windows open overnight. Another neighbor told me she had a mania for rummaging through others' recycling bins to see if anything suspicious was tossed out. She was essentially the local busybody with an overblown sense of power. Yet, nowhere in my training had I anticipated that Karen's meddling would soon cross into my professional world, taxes, on a scale that endangered many innocent people. Karen's curiosity about my background started within weeks of my move. She cornered me by the mailbox one morning. "So, you're an accountant, right?" she asked, her tone a mixture of feigned friendliness and pointed interrogation. "Yes," I replied, keeping my answers vague. "Consulting, mostly." She cocked her head. "Huh. I've noticed you get an awful lot of mail from out-of-state addresses. Business correspondence." I managed a polite laugh. "I have some clients scattered around the country." Her eyes lingered on me, as if trying to peel back my facade. "I see. Well, be sure to keep the outside of your mailbox tidy. We have standards, you know." Then she marched away. I didn't think much of it at the time, just typical neighborhood nosiness from someone with too much free time. But as days passed, I heard multiple stories about Karen's intense fascination with everyone's finances. A neighbor, the Johnson family, whispered that Karen insisted their kitchen remodel was beyond their means and demanded to see a building permit plus proof that they weren't laundering money. Another, Sandra Reyes, had been asked by Karen why she took so many Amazon packages and whether she was declaring all that income from online sales. It was bizarre. The notion that Karen would meddle in personal tax matters seemed overkill, even for an overzealous HOA enforcer. But soon, I'd learned she was pushing her suspicions even further. As summer approached, rumors swirled about neighbors receiving bizarre letters from the IRS, or so they appeared. These letters claimed the recipients were under scrutiny for unreported income or tax evasion. Entire families were plunged into panic, unsure why the federal government would target them. Some spent sleepless nights, rummaging through old receipts and W-2s, wondering if they'd accidentally missed a line on their tax forms. I learned about these letters when one distraught neighbor, Jacob Lewis, approached me, knowing I was an accountant. He waved a thick envelope in the air. "Alex, can you help me figure this out? I got this official-looking notice that says I'm being audited for the last 5 years, but it references an address for sending documents that doesn't match the usual IRS center." The letterhead looked official at first glance, but upon closer inspection, the text had subtle typos. Certain forms were mislabeled or used outdated references to tax codes. The mailing address was suspiciously a P.O. box not commonly used by the IRS. Even the formatting was off. I recognized the signs of a counterfeit. Yet it was elaborate enough to alarm a layperson. I calmed Jacob down, pointing out the inconsistencies. "This is likely a fake. The IRS would never ask you to send personal info to a random P.O. box that's not officially listed. I strongly suggest you ignore it and maybe notify the real IRS if you're worried." Jacob's face flooded with relief. "So you think it's a scam?" I was losing sleep over this. Behind his relief, I felt a slow boil of anger. Who was behind these forgeries? Did we have an identity theft ring targeting Rosewood Greens? Or was it an elaborate hoax? Only later would I link these letters to none other than Karen. But at this point, I still thought we were dealing with a run-of-the-mill scammer, not an HOA official with delusions of grandeur. Within a few weeks, close to 24 households reported receiving similar IRS notices. Each demanded immediate disclosure of financial statements and threatened legal action. A handful of families, too frightened to question the authenticity, began scrambling to gather documents. Some even tried calling the phone number provided on the letter, which always led to a vague voicemail with no official identification. One evening, I was hosting a casual barbecue in my backyard. Just a few neighbors, including the Johnsons, the Reyes family, and Jacob Lewis. Over grilled burgers, the topic turned inevitably to the dreaded letters. Mrs. Johnson was on the brink of tears. "We just spent thousands on a new kitchen. Now we're terrified we'll be investigated for something we didn't do. It's humiliating." Sandra Reyes chimed in. "I tried to contact the local IRS field office. They told me my name wasn't under any investigation, but I still can't shake off the fear. Why would someone do this?" Everyone turned to me, the accountant. I wished I could reveal I was an IRS Special Agent, but that would blow my cover. So I offered a measured approach. "These letters are suspicious. If you suspect fraud, you might want to file a police report or forward the details to the official IRS fraud line. But definitely don't give them any personal info." We suspected an external scammer. No one even considered a local angle, yet. The person responsible had cunningly used legitimate-sounding language and real forms for intimidation, but with subtle changes that turned them into fakes. Deep inside, A part of me braced for the day my professional life would collide with this fiasco. I was determined to keep my identity secret for as long as possible, but the safety and well-being of the neighborhood also weighed heavily on my conscience. Karen's presence around the neighborhood grew more intense. She drove up and down the streets in her small SUV at odd times, sometimes stopping abruptly to snap photos of houses. She left petty violation notices for trivial issues, a garden hose left out, a mailbox that wasn't polished. The typical forms of HOA overreach, sure, but her behavior took on an undercurrent of mania, as if she were searching for a bigger prize. Her circle of acquaintances on the HOA board noticed changes in her demeanor. She became secretive about new projects. She'd mentioned that she was close to unearthing major wrongdoing, but refused to provide details, claiming she had to protect the integrity of the investigation. One mild Thursday afternoon, I was walking Max when I spotted Karen rummaging through a neighbor's trash can. She was so absorbed, she didn't notice me until I cleared my throat. Startled, she jerked upright, a tattered envelope clutched in her gloved hand. "Oh, Alex. This bin was out on the wrong day, so I was checking if they'd thrown anything hazardous," she sputtered. I forced a neutral expression. "Doesn't the city handle that, not the HOA?" Karen's eyes flickered with irritation. "I have a responsibility to keep the neighborhood safe. Sometimes people hide incriminating info in the garbage, you know. Fraud is everywhere, right?" I said slowly, as a swirl of questions churned in my mind. Was she behind the phony audit notices? It seemed too insane, even for a self-styled Karen. On the other hand, her rummaging for incriminating info signaled she had a bizarre obsession with other people's finances. When she stalked off, I felt a chill. This was more than mere nosiness. Something bigger was at play. Little did I know how her twisted plan would soon ensnare the entire neighborhood, and me, ironically, as a covert IRS agent. Late one evening, I was on my laptop in the living room, finalizing a report for my superiors about a totally separate financial crime suspect. As an IRS Special Agent, my job typically involved analyzing complex bank records or coordinating with other law enforcement units. The false IRS letter fiasco in Rosewood Greens was not my official assignment, but the possibility that neighbors were being tormented by a sophisticated hoax gnawed at me. Suddenly, an email notification from an address I didn't recognize popped up in my personal inbox. The subject line read, "We need to talk about Karen. Urgent." Alarmed, I opened it. It was from a person claiming to be a concerned HOA board member. They wouldn't reveal their name, but they wrote, "I can't keep quiet anymore. Beatrice Arnett, Karen, has been forging fake IRS letters and sending them to families she suspects of tax fraud. She bragged in a private meeting that she wants to clean out dishonest neighbors by scaring them with audits. I can't condone this. I know you're an accountant. Please, help us expose her." My stomach dropped. The letter confirmed my darkest suspicions. Karen was behind the false audits, and it seemed she had no legitimate legal backing, just a twisted sense of moral crusade. If she had indeed created or mailed these letters under the guise of the IRS, that was a federal crime, potentially multiple. Mail fraud, impersonation of a federal agent, forging official documents, you name it. Now I was in an ethical bind. As an IRS Special Agent, I was sworn to uphold the law. This scheme threatened the safety and well-being of real families. Yet revealing my identity prematurely could jeopardize not just my personal cover, but potentially larger cases in which I was involved. I forwarded the email to a secure, encrypted channel for my supervisor. This was bigger than me alone. Karen, drunk on her perceived power, intensified her efforts. She began using the neighborhood's private Facebook group to post cryptic warnings. "Rosewood Greens residents, some of you are under close scrutiny for financial misconduct. You know who you are. If you have questionable income sources, it's best to come clean now before official enforcement arrives." Although she never explicitly claimed to be the IRS, her messages hinted at official investigations and pending audits. Families already reeling from the phony letters found themselves in a constant state of anxiety. Some started paying questionable fees to hush up what they believed to be real government demands, unknowingly funneling money to a P.O. box likely controlled by Karen. At an HOA meeting, Karen also tried to pass a motion requiring all homeowners to submit a financial disclosure form if they engaged in side businesses, claiming it was an HOA matter to ensure neighborhood integrity. This caused an uproar. Board members who previously tolerated Karen's eccentricities finally pushed back, calling her proposal unconstitutional and blatantly illegal. She retorted that tax cheats have no place in Rosewood Greens. The meeting ended in shouts, no resolution reached. What no one realized was that Karen had decided she would forcibly root out what she perceived as tax fraud. Her logic was twisted and her methods illegal, but in her mind, she was a crusader. She colluded with a shady acquaintance outside the neighborhood to help with forging letterheads and official-looking stamps. The circle of deception grew. Meanwhile, I quietly collected evidence of her infiltration into neighbors' mail or trash and the suspicious bank transactions from those who had sent payments to the phony IRS addresses. The more I uncovered, the more certain I became that it was time for the real IRS to step in. But my superiors insisted on a careful approach to avoid scaring Karen into hiding her tracks. We needed an airtight case. In early autumn, Karen brazenly filed small claims court motions against several neighbors, alleging they owed unpaid HOA dues or secretly gained income from unapproved home businesses. 11 families found themselves summoned by her personal civil complaints. She offered no substantial evidence, just references to documents that proved their shady finances. The local judge, baffled by the flurry of suits, demanded that Karen provide proper legal grounds or risk dismissal. She claimed she would produce the neighbors' IRS notices. But those notices were forgeries, and if she tried to present them in a public court, the ruse might be immediately exposed. She was playing with fire. I attended one of these preliminary hearings, blending into the small audience. Karen stood at the plaintiff's table with a stack of manila folders, glaring at each neighbor as though they were criminals. The defendants appeared confused, some terrified. When the judge pressed Karen for official IRS case numbers or statements from legitimate authorities, she stammered nonsense about government confidentiality. The judge's skeptical expression deepened. Ultimately, the judge postponed the hearing, giving Karen a deadline to produce actual evidence of wrongdoing. Furious, she left the courthouse red-faced, muttering that the system was protecting criminals. Her antics would have been comical if not for the real anguish she inflicted. That day, I had to hold myself back from confronting her. She was so close to incriminating herself by brandishing those forged letters in an official legal setting. If she did, it would effectively confirm her guilt. My superiors believed we should let her proceed. Every move she made now strengthened the federal case we were building. Soon, we'd have enough to arrest her on charges of wire fraud, mail fraud, impersonating a federal agency, and more. In my official capacity as an IRS Special Agent, my oath was to investigate tax-related offenses impartially. Usually, that meant going after actual tax evaders, unscrupulous accountants, or money launderers. Rarely did I witness someone so brazenly pretending to be the IRS itself to terrorize innocent families. I met with my supervisory special agent, Kendra Bishop, in a discreet location outside the suburb. Over coffee in a nondescript office suite, I presented the thick binder of evidence. Forged letters with suspicious P.O. boxes. Witness statements from neighbors who had confronted Karen or received her threats. Financial records from the handful of folks who had misguidedly paid the bogus IRS fees. Kendra flipped through the binder, frowning. This is an open and shut case of impersonating the IRS and mail fraud. She's engaged in a wide-scale intimidation campaign. But we must time the takedown so we gather maximum evidence to secure convictions. I nodded. Karen's apparently about to produce these forged letters in small claims court to prove her neighbors are shady. That might be the best moment to catch her red-handed. Kendra pursed her lips. Agreed. Let's not blow your cover yet. Keep pressing. Once she officially files those false documents, she'll cross a line that even a layman can see. Then we swoop in, with local authorities in the U.S. Postal Inspection Service or FBI if needed. We parted ways. While relieved that I had the agency's backing, I was anxious about the families enduring Karen's vendetta. If we waited too long, more neighbors might pay her fake penalties or have their personal data compromised. But to ensure a robust prosecution, a bit more patience was required. Even as the case built against her in secrecy, Karen pressed on with unstoppable arrogance. She obtained a list of the neighbors who had children in private schools or who had made any major purchase in the last year, a new car, a pool, a renovated kitchen. She decided those families must be cheaters, having the means for such luxuries. Using her forged templates, she mailed out a new wave of audit notices, this time referencing large penalties if recipients did not confess unreported income. A few families, desperate to stave off what they believed was official IRS action, reached out to that suspicious P.O. box to negotiate. More money changed hands. Karen also started showing up at doorsteps to follow up. She'd wave an envelope in a neighbor's face and say, "I know about your shady side hustle. The government's onto you." Then she'd grin slyly. "But maybe if you donate to the HOA's legal fund, we can keep the audit from digging too deep." Neighbors described these interactions as borderline extortion. Some considered contacting the police, though Karen kept referencing that local police can't override federal matters. She leveraged fear and confusion to keep them silent. It was a monstrous abuse of trust and a brazen crime. I, of course, documented it all. The secret recordings and statements were piling up. My only concern was the emotional toll on unsuspecting families. Kids were crying, worried their parents might go to jail. Retirees lost sleep, scanning old receipts to prove their innocence. The entire mood of Rosewood Greens darkened. Once peaceful blocks grew tense under Karen's financial inquisition. Still, the plan was to wait until Karen tried to present her false documents in an official capacity, ensuring a surefire conviction. That day was coming soon, and none too soon for the frazzled residents. Behind the scenes, I worked with local law enforcement to coordinate a quiet operation. The local postal inspector joined in, verifying that the P.O. box Karen used was opened under a shell name that led back to her. We discovered checks from frightened residents had been deposited into an account managed by her associate, a friend from outside the neighborhood who ran a small printing shop. The associate was, ironically, complicit in forging letterheads. Evidence was now overwhelming. We also discovered that Karen had used the HOA's official stationery for certain threatening letters, mingling it with the phony IRS communications. That further implicated her in forgery and false representation. She left digital footprints too, email addresses, IP logs, phone calls. For someone who prided herself on being cunning, Karen was reckless. While rummaging through public records for more data, I stumbled upon her own financial situation. She was heavily in debt, behind on mortgage payments, had multiple credit cards nearing their limit. Her single SUV was financed through a subprime lender. The lavish front of her life was fueled by desperation. The entire tax evasion crusade might have been a twisted ploy to get quick cash from neighbors. Ironically, the self-proclaimed champion of financial purity was sinking in her own sea of red ink. The U.S. Attorney's Office, once briefed, signaled readiness to file federal charges. All that remained was the final piece, letting her hoist herself by her own petard in a public forum, the small claims case she'd started. News of the second round of audit letters triggered a mass outcry in Rosewood Greens. Enough neighbors had swapped stories to realize the phone numbers, addresses, and even language in these notices were identical. At an impromptu community meeting convened by outraged residents, they demanded to know who was behind this orchestrated harassment. Karen, astonishingly, showed up. She delivered a self-righteous speech about how the IRS is investigating large-scale tax fraud here. She claimed she was just the messenger, ensuring that criminals in the neighborhood would face consequences. But her voice cracked under the barrage of furious questions. Why do all these letters come from the same P.O. box? Why are there so many spelling errors? Why is your name on some of the envelopes? Flustered, she deflected with bizarre accusations. Maybe you all are in on it. Maybe all of you are underreporting your income. The crowd erupted in shouts. Families demanded evidence. Some threatened lawsuits. Others brandished cell phone photos of her rummaging in mailboxes. Karen retreated hastily, red-faced, muttering that all would be revealed in court soon. The HOA board, for its part, was on the verge of removing her from her vice president role, but she refused to step down. The board president scheduled an official meeting to discuss disciplinary action, though Karen claimed, "I have bigger fish to fry than your petty motions." Rosewood Greens had become a war zone of suspicion and fear. Yet the biggest shock was mere days away. Unbeknownst to the residents, a sting operation was about to be launched, one that would bring Karen's entire house of cards crashing down. With the U.S. Attorney and local authorities on standby, my role became more proactive. Working with my boss, Kendra Bishop, I arranged a scenario designed to coax Karen into presenting her fake IRS documents in an undeniable legal context. We aimed to ensure she incriminated herself beyond any wiggle room. To do this, I approached a neighbor, Greg Harper, who was named in Karen's small claims lawsuits. Greg had a home-based tech repair business, which Karen labeled unreported income. I quietly advised him to push Karen to produce her IRS proof at the next hearing, or else he'd accept her settlement demands. The idea was to see if she would present the forged documents to the court or attempt to finalize an extortion payment. Either way, she'd be committing a felony in plain sight. Greg, though nervous, agreed to help. He arranged a phone call with Karen, letting me discreetly record from another line. She demanded $5,000 to call off the IRS, claiming she had official letters proving he owed back taxes. If he paid her, she promised to make the problem go away. That call alone was enough for an extortion charge, but we wanted more. We wanted the big, slam-dunk evidence. Karen boasted she was going to submit the documents to the judge soon, and that Greg's best chance was to pay up before the hearing. Greg feigned compliance, hoping to lure her into an in-person transaction. Meanwhile, the stage was set for law enforcement to intervene the moment she tried to finalize the hush money scheme or display her forgeries in court. One day before the next small claims hearing, the HOA board convened a special session to address Karen's harassment. The entire neighborhood was welcome to attend. The small community hall filled to capacity, residents hungry for answers or retribution. Tension crackled like static in the air. Karen arrived late, wearing her signature-pressed blazer. She marched to the front, ignoring the glowers, and whispered insults. The board president, Diane Miller, attempted to keep order. "We are here to discuss the numerous complaints about your conduct, Ms. Arnett. Our residents are frightened and outraged by these alleged IRS letters." Karen snorted. "Alleged? They're real. If your precious neighbors have nothing to hide, they have nothing to fear." A wave of indignation rippled through the crowd. Some residents brandished the suspicious letters, demanding to know why they all had the same formatting. One man shouted, "Why is the phone number disconnected? Why is the address a P.O. box in the next county over?" Cornered, Karen doubled down. "The IRS uses many field offices. Not everything is published online. I'm just helping gather evidence. I can't reveal all details." She tried to hand out some photocopies as proof, but the board refused to accept them as official documents. Diane Miller insisted that no further action would be taken unless Karen produced legitimate case numbers or verified contacts from a real IRS field office. At that moment, I couldn't resist. I asked calmly from my seat near the back, "Karen, if these investigations are legitimate, why not let these families confirm with the main IRS phone line or a local IRS building? They've called, but the IRS denies any open audits. Doesn't that suggest these letters might be fake?" She froze. Anger flashed in her eyes. "You're just an accountant, Alex. I have direct knowledge from government sources. This is above your pay grade." The crowd erupted in jeers. I stayed silent, my heart pounding, because I knew tomorrow's hearing would be Karen's downfall. She was so sure she could bully her way to victory, not realizing the true might of the law arrayed against her. The next morning, the small claims court in the local municipal building was abuzz. Karen was set to face off against several neighbors she had sued. Among them was Greg Harper, the home-based tech repairman, who was my partner in the carefully orchestrated operation. We had informed local law enforcement, the U.S. Attorney's Office, and the judge's clerk about the sting. I sat in the back row, wearing a conservative suit to blend with the typical court crowd. Also present were two plainclothes special agents from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, plus a local detective. We spread out to avoid suspicion. Greg's case was called first. Karen strode forward confidently, large folders in hand. She told the judge that Greg was operating an illicit business, failing to report thousands of dollars in income. She brandished a sheaf of papers. "I have IRS audit documents right here that show he's under investigation." The judge frowned. "May I see them?" Karen smirked, flipping to a page. "Certainly." She marched up to the bench, placing the documents proudly in front of the judge. The pages had official-looking seals, except for the glaring inaccuracies. Archaic references, mismatch in formatting, a wrong phone extension. My pulse quickened. We had her. The judge examined them for half a minute, her expression growing increasingly stony. "Ms. Arnett, these do not look like legitimate IRS forms. Where exactly did you obtain them?" Karen's confidence wavered. "From a contact. They're real. I swear." She tried to maintain the facade, pointing to random lines. "See, that's the official code for audits." At that moment, One of the plainclothes IRS agents rose and approached. "Ms. Arnett, I'm Special Agent Johnson with IRS Criminal Investigation. May I take a closer look?" Her face drained of color. "Who are you?" I don't need to." But the judge waved him up. The agent briefly reviewed the documents, then turned to the judge. "These are forgeries, Your Honor. We have reason to believe Ms. Arnett has been impersonating the IRS." He nodded toward me, and I stepped forward as well, discreetly flashing my badge. Karen's eyes widened. Your IRS? But you said you were just an accountant living in the neighborhood." I gave a slight shrug. "Undercover. Sorry, you forced my hand." Panic flashed across Karen's face as the realization sank in. She tried to gather her papers and flee, but the local detective stepped forward, blocking her path. Another agent gently but firmly took her by the arm. The entire courtroom looked on in stunned silence. "You can't do this to me," she screeched, voice shrill with desperation. "I'm the victim here. They're all tax cheats. This is my duty, to protect the government's interests." Special Agent Johnson replied calmly, "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." He recited her Miranda rights as she raged incoherently. Reporters, alerted by a tip from the local detective, snapped photos of the dramatic scene. Karen, once the self-appointed watchdog of Rosewood Greens, was handcuffed, her forged documents seized as evidence. Greg Harper, who'd orchestrated the final trap with me, exhaled heavily, relief flooding his face. The judge swiftly dismissed Karen's case, apologizing to the wrongly accused neighbors. Then, with Karen in custody, the entire fiasco ended right there in that small municipal courtroom. As I watched Karen led away, I felt a surge of vindication. She'd spread fear and chaos among innocent residents, harnessing the power of false IRS intimidation for her own twisted ends. Now, real justice awaited her, courtesy of a system she had blatantly tried to impersonate. Karen's downfall made headlines in local media. HOA official arrested for faking IRS audits. Interviews with traumatized neighbors described the months of anxiety they'd endured. People learned how close they came to losing thousands to her fraudulent scheme. Some admitted they had nearly shared sensitive information or even parted with hush money. The Rosewood Greens community reeled, shaken but also relieved that the nightmare was over. As the federal case progressed, the charges stacked high: mail fraud, wire fraud, impersonating a federal agency, extortion, forgery, abuse of postal services, and more. The U.S. attorney had an ironclad case, complete with recorded phone calls, financial receipts, physical forgeries, witness testimony, and her meltdown in small claims court. Karen's associate, the printing shop owner, also faced charges for aiding and abetting. Desperate for a plea deal, Karen's attorney tried to spin a sob story. She was struggling financially. She meant no real harm. She just wanted to expose wrongdoing. But there was no real wrongdoing on the part of the neighbors, only her manufactured illusions. The prosecution refused to budge on major charges, given the scale of her actions and the large sums stolen from vulnerable families. Ultimately, Karen pled guilty to multiple felony counts. During sentencing, the judge lambasted her for terrorizing an innocent community and deceiving families for personal gain. The final sentence included several years in federal prison and a massive restitution order covering the stolen money, legal fees for her victims, and punitive damages. She was left financially ruined. The bank quickly foreclosed on her home. Her once intimidating presence in Rosewood Greens was replaced by a stark memory of how far delusional entitlement could go. With Karen gone, Rosewood Greens slowly recovered. The HOA board restructured, adopting new transparency rules to prevent any single member from accumulating too much power. They also improved neighborhood communication, ensuring that if suspicious letters surfaced again, residents could confirm authenticity through local or official channels. Families breathed easier, no longer dreading random knocks on the door or suspicious envelopes in the mail. Greg Harper and the others who'd been sued or harassed had their records cleared and found closure in Karen's downfall. Over time, property values rebounded, buoyed by the sense of unity among neighbors who had weathered a bizarre crisis together. My undercover role ended soon after. The separate criminal investigation I was originally tasked with concluded around the same time. Before I left, I attended a neighborhood barbecue, this time without any secret agenda. Neighbors teased me, calling me Agent Alex, and joking that they'd declare every penny on their tax forms now. We laughed, the tension of prior months evaporating into the warm night air. That evening, I glimpsed what Rosewood Greens could be, a supportive, friendly place, free from the tyranny of a self-styled enforcer. Karen's crimes had tested them, but also brought out their solidarity. Stepping away from my time in the neighborhood, I felt satisfied not just as an agent who cracked a case, but also as a temporary resident who had seen everyday folks stand strong against a bully. In the end, Karen's misguided scheme led only to her own downfall, jail and property confiscation, while Rosewood Greens emerged with a renewed commitment to fairness and neighborly care. A cautionary tale, no doubt, about how even the quietest suburbs can harbor explosive drama and how unstoppable justice can be when arrogance tangles with federal law.